Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/home soon.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics, and welcome to the week of the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad BC budget, half a dozen tax increases, and still the largest deficit in British Columbia's history at $13.3 billion. We're going to get into it here. There's all sorts of stuff, delayed projects and frozen spending and red ink as far as the eye can see. I called it the all pain, no gain BC budget. I'm sure Jeff's going to come up with something more articulate to hit me back on that one. But we will bring in the pod squad. Speaking of Jeff, there he is. Angelo, Isidorou, Jillian, Oliver, Jeff Ferrier. Okay. I want to, first, just before we go here, let's listen to the Premier, because he wrapped up the week talking about his budget at the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. Let's have a listen to that.
We will reduce expenditure. We have done what we can to identify limited sources of additional revenue. But at the end of the day, if we're not growing the economy, then we're going to be struggling to deliver for British Columbians.
All right, the Premier saying we've done what we can. Well, on expenses, the only thing left is to grow the economy. What, you want us to cut healthcare? Got a bit of a rough ride at the Board of Trade. Some good questions by President Bridget Anderson about the plan, if there is one here, on what to do about all of this. Let's go around and get the budget reaction to the budget reaction that is out there. Angelo, what do you think of the budget and how it landed?
What baffles me is that it's not clear who this is for. It's not clear who the winner is with this budget. It's an assault on seniors with added taxes. It's an assault on businesses. We see multiple businesses in the news today talking about how these PST changes are going to affect them, including on security, right? You think about grocery stores and the necessity for them to be safe. It's an assault on families. I mean, David Eby promised that he would maintain these targets for autism funding, and now he broke that promise, and you're going to have up to 10,000 families losing access after it was already so difficult. So when you look at the budget as a whole, it's not clear to me where the wins are. It's an abysmal budget. If I had to argue, who does this benefit? Perhaps it only benefits the allies of the NDP who maybe want cushy contracts because it gets rid of the office of the merit commissioner. So it's an abysmal budget. The Globe and Mail did this editorial that just skewers it that I recommend people look into, because it puts our province in a place where we are no longer competitive, and we can't blame it on global issues. But like that is just an outright fiction that this is just a global issue. This is highly irresponsible spending, and it's the worst deficit in our history. We'll come back to the merit commissioner, I think, in a next segment. But interesting. Jeff, what did you think when you saw the budget?
I think it's a tough budget, for sure. There are tax increases. There's a real mounting deficit, and they're hard choices. I would have liked to have seen from government a more energetic, on the offense approach to the budget. They looked tired and defensive, is my impression. I would have liked to hear from the Premier something more like, our economy's under pressure. We are facing tariffs. We are facing global instability. That's hitting every province. And as a trading province, we are feeling this big time. In the next few years, they're going to be tough. They're going to require sacrifice from all of us. But if we stick together, we're going to get through it. We'll protect healthcare and education and growth. $50 billion of private sector investment poised to happen this year. That growth is coming, and there are stronger days ahead. I think instead what we got was an apologetic approach to the budget, when I think there's a story to be told about coming together during difficult times, all of us making sacrifice to get to a better place, that if we keep our eye on the ball and keep working hard, we'll get to it.
Mm-hmm. Jillian, the tax increases, the increase to the lowest, the universal tax bracket of the first 50,000, the PST expansions, all sorts of little tiny things here that I think probably looks like it has ticked people off without a corresponding benefit of actually having accomplished anything in terms of the deficit growing. And that disconnect, it feels like people maybe been struggling with that for the week. But what did you think of how it landed?
Yeah, I think the thing that stands out to me about that was just how poorly it was foreshadowed. Thinking about our show last week, what we kind of all thought based on what the finance minister said was that we were going to be seeing cuts. And she was pretty clear that we weren't going to be seeing big tax increases. And I never would have expected them on a lower income end of the scale, or on something that could be inflationary and drive up prices, given that cost of living is the number one concern for people right now. So that, I think that caught everybody off guard. It feels to me like they were freaking out about the size of the deficit, and decided they had to do something, and looked at a list of recommendations of where they could raise money from the civil service and kind of just cherry picked what they thought would be easiest to implement, without applying any kind of like political lens or vision, like to what Angelo said, without thinking about who are they really serving and what are they trying to accomplish. It feels very reactive, and without kind of a clear strategy or vision of where we're headed as a province.
I agree with you totally that, and also what sort of to pick on what Jeff said there, like there was a way to take this budget, I think, and sell it. But the setup to the budget was so odd, with the finance minister basically kind of framing it as an austerity budget to the Board of Trade, and then the government bristling at that. You had the deputy minister, the premier, putting out a note a couple weeks before saying an $11 billion surplus is unsustainable, and she knows full well a $13 billion one is coming. You have Eby and Bailey spending weeks saying we're looking at ways to bring the deficit down, when they know they're bringing it up by $4 billion in the budget they've prepared. And then you have the finance minister the day before the budget telling media there's no tax increases, and there's half a dozen. And the thing felt like it was set up to fail in this confusing version. But as Jeff has pointed out, you could have framed it as a holding steady in tough times sort of thing, but they set up all these weird contradicting expectations. Like someone should study that, because that was the worst way to introduce a budget I have seen since the HST. And man, that is a low bar for things. Anyway, let's go around again on the budget. I want to talk on deficit, debt, and then maybe even $10 a day childcare, and just throw those out there because that was frozen. The debt is rising. Some people were picking up on that. Are there political fallouts from other parts very specific to the budget? Angelo, we'll go to you on that one. Maybe childcare, other parts there.
Well, my understanding is that our debt servicing is what, our fourth biggest ministry now. So I think that this is the downstream effects of bad fiscal management, right? I mean, we have overall in the Western world enjoyed, spending. And I think there are very few people, or perhaps not enough people, that remember what it's like to deal with, a significant interest rate or significant debt that you have to service. So we are going to see it affect other things. I was surprised that the healthcare projections were very modest, like they barely keep up with inflation. But at the same time, the projections from the government are largely worthless because their last projections were wildly off too. So even the data that we have is not great. I mean, I go back to the bird's eye view, which is David Eby inherited a surplus. And if you look at that graph, and people can look this up, of this graph of just the downward slope of the spending, we don't have much to show about it, and this is not John Horgan's NDP. So it's certainly problematic.
Jeff, the $10 a day childcare, is that a problem for government? I mean, it hasn't really been achieved, but now they're reviewing it. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think for most British Columbians, the deficit and the debt, they are important, but they won't be, certainly in the NDP universe, the top of mind difficult things that will be in place for the government. I think over the coming months and years, it's going to be childcare, it's going to be investment in housing, it's going to be the delayed projects, a hospital in Burnaby, some long-term care, and a university residence in Victoria, and those public sector job cuts. I think for the core of the NDP, those will be the most difficult. It's always revealing, though, to watch the opposition on the budget. One day it's calls for cuts, the next it's complaints about restraint and programs being called back. If you look at the NDP on debt, our debt to GDP ratio is lower than Ottawa's. It's lower than Conservatives in Ontario and Quebec. Yes, there are challenges. That debt absolutely has to come down, but the alarm bells seem to be selective. Loud in British Columbia, much quieter in Conservative provinces carrying more debt.
Yeah, the debt number, for sure, you can compare them to GDP. The debt interest cost this budget surpasses the amount we spend on social development in the province. And by the third year of the budget, it's going to come this close to the amount we spend for the entire K-12 education system, which is kind of staggering to think about that. But Jillian, just close us off on this. Is there anything else that jumps out on you in the budget?
Well, the first thing that jumped out to me is that I think we can put early election rumors to rest at least until we get the next budget, because there's no way that the government is going to run on this. It is like the opposite of an election budget, and I'm sure that they know that. Like, they didn't even try. So I think, for me, I'm glad that we won't be able to have to talk about that for a while. And also, it'll be really interesting to see where they go from here, because it's not clear. I think that they sort of decided, okay, times are tough, things are rough. We're trying to get as much investment as we can and to turn things around on growth and try and boost revenues. It's just going to be so interesting to see if that pans out and where they're going to go next for the next couple budgets, because it's not really clear how they can improve on this.
I think we can still speculate about elections just for fun.
No.
Just for fun, we can do it. Okay, but you're right.
There's definitely going to be an election in the next 3 months.
All right, we'll take a break here. We're going to come back and talk a bit about the part of the budget that eliminates the merit commissioner of all things, coming up after this.
I don't see that there is reason for the merit commissioner's office to continue when they, on their own work, their reviews are finding zero difficulty. And it's because the adoption of merit as principle has been fully adopted into the PSA. This is work that's happening every day.
All right, that's Finance Minister Brenda Bailey saying she does not see the point in keeping the merit commissioner because, in her words, there is zero political patronage going on around government, so it can take over the job of watching itself. It's moved to eliminate the merit commissioner, one of 9 independent officers of the legislature, hidden in the budget. No one disclosed it in the budget lockup. The BCGU doesn't like it. The opposition doesn't like it. What do we make of why government is doing this? Jeff, probably a lot of people haven't even heard of the merit commissioner, but now we're talking about it. What did you think?
I was just going to ask, has anyone on the panel, have they heard of the merit commissioner before Tuesday? It's a under the radar position in government. I think there's compelling arguments for it in terms of deterring job hires without merit. I think what government is doing is looking around, auditing different spending to find savings and what has made a difference and what hasn't. You look back at the merit commissioners last year, and I acknowledge the people who work in that office work hard and they're focused on the right things, but there was no yearly audit in 2025. There were 12 staffing reviews in total conducted at the request of members of the public, and 11 found no issues, and 1 was sent back for reconsideration. And all appointments, political appointments, are publicly disclosed through order in council. So you can go to a website, look every day at the appointments government's making, and if you see a name in there like Michael Bryant or Nathan Allen, we've talked about them on the show before, you can see that. You can find that out, and the opposition can raise concerns about it. So putting it in the budget document is a bit sneaky, I'll acknowledge, but I think in terms of value for money, this is maybe a commissioner that we can do without in times like these. $2 million, 6 people, Jillian, 1 of 9 watchdogs. I guess you could make the argument like, well, the Auditor General hasn't found anything for a while, so maybe we don't need an Auditor General. We can just audit ourselves. I don't know where you take the government's logic train on this, but what do you think?
Yeah, it's even a little bit lower than 2 million. It's a really quite a small amount of money in the grand scheme of things. And I mean, I think it's kind of like installing a red light camera with, really high tickets for that. And then people stop running them and you say, oh, okay, I guess we don't need it anymore. We can shut the camera down. I think that the existence of the office itself serves as a deterrent and encourages government to hold itself to a higher standard with its hiring practices. And so I think it is concerning just given how small of a line item it is, and how critical of a role it serves in kind of ensuring the integrity of government hiring and preventing potential abuse. They have over the years found, I think, over 1,000 of unmerited hirings, and I think it's a really important safeguard that we have to prevent that from happening.
It comes in the context, Angelo, of the budget with 15,000 expected FTE reductions in the broader public sector, of which 2,500 are going to be in the civil service. So there's going to be moving around. As the BCGU said, there's going to be competition for these jobs and attrition, and they think it should be done on merit. So there is a context here that it maybe gives government breathing room to eliminate the watchdog and how it handles what it's about to do to the civil service. Makes it easier for them.
It's not worth it, right? I mean, if I'm putting on my political hat, I would never advise the NDP to do this, especially after the year they've had with hiring Michael Bryant, planning to pay a political ally hundreds of thousands of dollars to pretend to work. You need this watchdog the same way you need an auditor. Just because you don't have any issues doesn't mean that you don't, I'll file my taxes and I've never had issues, therefore you don't need to be audited. Like it's completely politically bizarre to me that they would do this for a line item that is so small and for something they very sneakily put into the budget. This is something that we need, and it's a pattern that we've seen with the NDP. It's the same with the FOI requests or the local auditors. It's a strange pattern. So to say we don't need it anymore, I think is politically ill-advised. And I think as a taxpayer, we want to know that political allies are not being hired into these offices.
What was the line you used before, Angelo? The juice isn't worth the squeeze? I think we could use that one again. I'm not sure for $2 million it's worth the kind of flack that the government's going to take for it.
Hey, you know where I'd like to see a merit commissioner? I'd like to see a merit commissioner looking at people like Dallas Brody and Tara Armstrong and seeing if they have any value in the legislative assembly.
I guess called voters, potentially.
It's the same thing with public appointments, right? If a government, through orders of council, has found that they're doing what Angelo is saying that they're doing, voters have a chance to give them the boot.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of those, a lot of special advisors to the premier that could probably total them up and achieve more than $2 million in savings there alone. But okay, let's take a break here. When we come back, another look at just some of the demographics in the budget and other groups that might be pleased or, well, no one's pleased, but less unhappy than others after this.
This government committed to keeping seniors in their homes because they're not building long-term care homes. Now, what this does is make it more unaffordable for seniors to stay in their home, and at the same time, removes options for them to move out of those homes. This absolutely fails seniors. This government has abandoned them.
Well, that's opposition seniors critic Brennan Day saying his budget hits seniors hard. You do have the expansion of the PST to things like landlines and cable television, for shame, and yarn, of all things, yarn. You have 7 long-term care homes paused due to lack of money, and you have a property tax deferral program for seniors to defer their taxes, jacked up with interest rates and compound interest. So there's one issue here about maybe seniors. Are there other demographics, families, rural voters, urban folks, environmentalists, anyone else that we think in the pros and cons of this budget we might be hearing from in the days ahead? Jillian, any sort of groups jump out at you?
Well, yeah, I think definitely one of the worst budgets for seniors that I've seen since in politics. The kind of double whammy of the modification of the property tax deferral program and the halting of long-term care, I think, is especially a tough pill to swallow for those groups, because that's a program, the property tax deferral program is intended to keep seniors in their homes, so therefore out of needing other forms of housing. So I think that's really difficult. And I think it goes to sort of the lack of vision and the lack of sort of like an overall plan for who they're serving and for the province. And it's very reactive in that way, where they kind of just went through a whole list of things of what could they cut, what could they stall, and just sort of randomly slashed things. families having $10 a day childcare stalled. I mean, that was one of like the biggest NDP affordability promise that first brought them into government. I think that's really hard going to be really hard for people to swallow. Also seeing an end to the funding for nonprofit housing, an end of a fund there. So not a lot of good news anywhere, except I think maybe for unions, we saw fairly generous terms for bargaining just ahead of the NDP convention. And I think that's probably like the one group that they prioritized placating ahead of the budget, and not much for anybody else.
Mm-hmm. Angelo, what do you think?
Lower income individuals, right? When you talked about yarn, really what they're doing is, adding the PST to materials to repair items, right? So if you're a British Columbian who is making use of that and you are, sewing your pants and really stretching the value of your items as much as possible, that's going to affect lower income individuals especially. But on seniors, when you talk about landline and cable, I mean, they need these items, like landline specifically. Most of us don't use landlines anymore, but as a senior, you need that for healthcare workers. You need that to connect with your family. But I still go back to the autism funding. I need to focus on that one because it's such a blatant broken promise. And you're seeing all sorts of stakeholders and validators from that community come out and say, hey, this is not what we were promised. And it was already not going well. Right. The last group I would just focus on again is business owners. Like we have, an optometrist in Victoria saying he's going to pay an extra $1,000 a year because of some of these added PST costs. So it's all around bad.
Appreciate you all being here this week and helping us break this budget down. I'm sure we'll be talking about it in the weeks ahead, as well as the estimates go through the BC legislature and we learn more. Thank you for watching as well. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast for extra content. We'll be back next week with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn how Uber and Mad Canada are reducing impaired driving at uber.com/homesoon.